How did you come here today? Who drove? Come on, raise your hands. All right, you came and you drove and got here conveniently. Now let me ask you, what's your car doing right now? It's having fun? It's got that little Alfa Romeo over there. Ooh, look at that. So think about that. What's that car doing right now? Do you normally drive to work? How many of you drive to work? Okay, another group of individuals here. Again, what's your car doing when you drive to work or after you get to work? Sitting down there looking at the Mercedes over there. That's the boss's Mercedes, you know. Oh, I want one of those someday. I'm going to be one. I'm going to grow into that. So again, what we think about, we probably don't think about at all. You probably park your car, lock it, go to work, come back, there it is, and you never even think about it. The unfortunate thing is that an automobile, in general, is operated less than 5% of the time during its useful life. During the time it exists, it is running less than 5% of the time. Now, most of you who have a car, it's either your first, if you don't own a home, or second most expensive purchase. I used to work in industry and ran a number of operations, and if I had people who worked for me who took the first or second most important asset that they had and ran it less than 5% of the time, I might not have them working for me for very long. That's not a very efficient thing to do. And yet we do it without even thinking. It's because it's a habit. It's something that, well, isn't that what everybody does? And therefore we, like lemmings, follow those people and follow that thinking without really breaking it down and asking ourselves, is this really something that's good for us or good for the world in which we live? Speaking of your work, how many of you have an office? And what is it doing right now? You know, office buildings are occupied less than 50% of the time. And if you're like me, and you travel quite a bit, it's a very small fraction. Yet don't we always want that big corner office, that wonderful desk, that secretary sitting outside? That's us, you know, we want to get up there. This is our world that we want. But when we think about it, we don't really use that very much. Another thing, why do we go to work at between 7 and 9 in the morning and go home between 4 and 7 in the evening, Monday through Friday? Somebody programmed that into your mind, that that's the appropriate thing to do? Everybody goes to work at those times, and what happens to the traffic? We get traffic jams in the morning, we get traffic jams in the evening. And then we all curse and get upset, uptight, we hate those people in front of us. How could they possibly drive that stupid? Look at that, oh my God. Without thinking that we're all doing the same thing. We're all causing the problem because of our habit of going to work at that hour of the day and coming home at the same hour in the evening. The same thing happens in the summertime, by the way. Any of you go down on vacation, try to get past Stuttgart, go through down to Spain? During vacation time, there's a huge, huge traffic jam. Because we all go down the same road system. Now, the rest of the year, that road's a pretty nice road. But at that time of the year, we all curse it because, oh my goodness, it's so traffic jammed. Again, our habits get in the way. We all work like lemmings. I ask these questions because I want you to think as opposed to follow habits. Think about the things that you do. Because if we're going to solve the problems and that are going to face us in a broader way in the future, we cannot face those problems using the same thinking that we do today. Those problems require us to look forward and not look in the rearview mirror for solutions that happened yesterday. The future is changing, and we need to think differently. Otherwise, what we're going to have is a repeat of the problems and the failures that we have seen in the last number of years in addressing these problems. Using a traditional thinking to address these problems, for the urban environment at least, does not lead to any good situations. Our urban environments are built out. We have problems in finding housing that's affordable for people. Yet we don't have problems in finding space for office buildings. In today's age, we don't need to go to the office. Studies have indicated that young people today spend 8 to 9 hours sitting in front of a piece of glass. You don't need to go to an office to do that. You can do that in the park. You can do it at home. Most of us who go to the office don't even see our office mates. They're traveling, or we have so much business in front of the glass that we're looking at, they could be gone anyway. So going to the office is a historical situation that really isn't needed. And if we didn't go to the office, all of those wonderful offices that are built downtown could be used for different purposes, perhaps used for building wohnen and reducing the costs of living in the downtown areas, reducing overall housing shortages. Here in Hamburg, finding a place to live is one of the more exciting things you do when you get here. I mean, if you have lots and lots of coin, then you can probably find a place. But if you're looking for a nice but affordable place, then you've got a problem. And that's because we use things in a historical way without thinking about, do we really need this? Do you really think young people today, I mean, I teach young people, and I can tell you these young people keep pushing me and telling me, hey, why do we have to come to the university? Why can't you do this on video? I mean, I look at YouTube and look at all of the things I can find out there. Why do I have to go to the university? And we have to think that the young people of today are not going to want the solutions that an old guy like me probably felt comfortable with. In fact, I can guarantee it. The amount of time I spend in front of a glass screen is far less than 8 to 9 hours a day. So we need to think differently, or we're not going to help the situations we see, whether it's in our urban environments or just in the environment in general, or in the problems that we have amongst ourselves in relationships with other countries. We need to think, and think strongly about what we're doing. So a few basic facts about our urban environments for a point of departure here. These environments were not designed for the 21st century. The environments we see here were designed with a retrospective look back to the 19th century. Most of the cities in Europe were designed back in the 18th or 19th century. And they don't have the capacity to handle the types of movements that we're asking those cities to handle. In those days, you traveled very short distances between home and office, home and workplace, because you didn't have cars. You had horses, or you walked. So everything was within a community. Today, we've decided that because an automobile gives us mobility, or distance mobility, that we can expand our footprint and operate a community as a city. Well, that's a nice idea, but it also forms the problem that we have with everyone coming to work at the same time and everyone going home at the same time. It leads us to a nice little situation that if we continue down this pathway, the cities will grow like they do in Southern California. And that is, they sprawl everywhere. And people sit in traffic jams for 2 hours to get to work and 2 hours to get home, which is a waste of human time, but also of just all sorts of energy. So we need to think differently. What can we do? Well, I mentioned young people. Why don't we start thinking about the world like young people do? Young people don't want to own things, and those things that they own, they'd like to share. So we have things like car sharing, Airbnb, room sharing. People share bicycles. People share all sorts of things today because they don't use them all the time. It's a great idea. We could share office space if we all must come into town and go to the office. Because if the offices are occupied less than 50% of the time, somebody else can use them the 50% of the time that I'm not using them. So we can learn a little bit from the young people. And more importantly, they're the people who are going to inherit the decisions we make. So we need to think about them, not about us. Because they and their habits have to take what we do and move the world forward. So we can think about the sharing economy. We might even think about using other models to redesign how we do things. So why not create a physical internet? We've got a digital internet, but what about a physical internet? Similar kinds of concepts, where we don't own what we have, but we simply dial it up like a mail message. So I want to go from point A to point B. Why do I have to own the vehicle? In fact, this is how Google is designing its cars. It's designing them with the idea in mind that they're on demand. You call it, it comes to you, it takes you to where you want to go. Another person calls the same vehicle, it picks them up. You get ready to come home, another vehicle comes and takes you home. So you don't have to own the vehicles. Most of you live here in Hamburg, and when you look outside your window, you see cars, very expensive cars, by the way, parked out in the curb areas along the streets. I'm trying to ride my bicycle and I'm going, I don't like those cars there, but they park everywhere because because the city doesn't have the space for them, yet everyone wants their car. And like I said, they're very beautiful cars. There are a lot of money sitting out there in those streets. Getting dirty, the rain's falling down, birds are coming over. I always wonder about that, but yeah, we have these things out there. Why do we have all of these things parked up and down the streets? I mean, for one thing, it's not very attractive. I mean, the cars are nice, but all of them parked out there doesn't look very good. And for another thing, it's just, again, an example of the misuse of things that could be used differently. So a physical internet, maybe something like that could work to eliminate those types of problems. And it could also create opportunities for all of us in the area of sharing again, because we would then have the assets owned or at least operated on a much more intense basis. Well, it's a bit out there, yeah, okay, but I mean, it's some kind of idea to revolutionize how we think of one aspect of the urban environment, which is mobility. And we should think of that for other things in the urban environment as well, because our current approaches to trying to address these problems aren't working. And when we look at these approaches, we tend to be very Western in this respect. How many of you have been to the Far East? Arms go up, yes. How many of you been to Jakarta? How do you like the traffic in Jakarta? I teach a group of executives in Jakarta, and I go there probably 4 or 5 times a year. I land at the airport, and where I teach is 43 kilometers exactly from the airport. Now, guess how long it takes me to go 43 kilometers in Jakarta. 3.5 to 4 hours to go 43 kilometers. And on a Friday afternoon, it can take upwards of 6.
You cannot take a motorbike taxi?
You can take a motorbike. You can. They have 2 problems or 3 problems in Jakarta. They don't have public transport that works. That's one problem. The second is, in the 1960s, a nice decision by the government at that time, because people didn't have the money to buy automobiles, was to encourage the population to buy motor scooters. And the motor scooters that you can buy in Jakarta are not like the motor scooters you buy here. They're much simpler, less powerful, and very, very unclean in the amount of pollutants that they dump out. So in Jakarta, when you come to a traffic signal, there may be 200 to 300 motor scooters standing at the traffic signal to try and get through. Imagine what that does to a traffic flow that is a mingling of motor scooters and cars. It's crazy. It doesn't really work very well. And the other problem that they have is underpowered vehicles, because in the Far East, many trucks are very, very old and quite underpowered for what they're being asked to do. But when we take a look at trying to solve urban problems, we need to look beyond simply the West. We need to look at where growth in the future is going to occur. Africa has the same problems. When we begin to look at countries in Africa and the cities there, and we need to think about how do we leapfrog over the issues we're facing today. And by doing that, we have to break out of the habitual thinking that we have to look forward. So these things have to be thought about. The problems that we're going to try and solve in environmental issues, in the global warming, in structuring ourselves so we address the conflicts that we see in the world. All of these require different thinking, because the way that we have gone and addressed them is very clearly not working, much as this traffic jam here shows for this city process. So where we can go is where no one has gone before. We need to be like the voyagers on the Enterprise. We need to go out and boldly go. Boldly think differently. Because if we think the same, we're not going to address those problems. Thank you very much.